right, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm your host, Courtenay, and I'm super passionate about moving and thinking. On this show, we are going to dive into all things health, fitness, personal development, lifestyle, and political sociocultural. I've always been fascinated by people, and I love learning from the experiences and stories of others. This has been a treat for me, and I hope this is enjoyable and useful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or any way that I can make this a better experience for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Hello, welcome back to the Courtenay Turner podcast. As you may have noticed, I have taken a bit of a hiatus. I moved across the country, and might talk a little bit more about that. Possibly I'll do a solo episode and explain all of that. But I'm super excited about my guest today, Dr. Lori Earley. She is a doctor of acupuncture, Chinese medicine, and naet practitioner, which is fascinating. She was just telling me about it. I'll let her explain more of that. And she used to work in the pharmaceutical industry. So very, very relevant to what's occurring today. And I'm super excited to hear her tell us a little bit of her experience and her perspective on the current milieu, given her experience. How are you doing today, Lori?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. So tell us a little bit for my audience who is not familiar with your work, what you do, and tell them a little about what you do and how you do transition from being a pharmaceutical rep into doing the type of work you do now.
Yeah. So just to go back a little bit further, before pharmaceuticals, I have a master's in microbiology where I at one point was specializing in virology. However, if you know anything about viruses and virology, it's actually pretty boring. And so a lot of it was just like sitting in a lab and pipetting stuff in and just waiting for data to scroll out. So I didn't stay in virology very long, but I did go into microbiology, and I worked in the lab doing electron microscopy. My intention was always to go and get my PhD and be in academia where I was a professor and, doing research and things like that. But I just blasted through college so quickly that after my master's, I was like, okay, I need to actually get a job. And I landed a pharmaceutical rep position in 2001. And then thinking I would only do that for a couple years and then go back and get my PhD, it ended up that I was there for 9.5 years. Wow. And by 2010, I had seen enough. So we can go into more detail about that. But then that led me into really wanting to work one-on-one with patients and understanding the corruption associated with Western medicine and pharmaceuticals, and really wanting to do something more holistic where I'm treating the patient and working on how did they get this way? Why? Versus just labeling them with a disease and putting a medication as a Band-Aid on top of it. And so it led me to Chinese medicine, where I originally got my master's in acupuncture and Chinese medicine in 2013. And then I went on to get my doctorate. And so what I'm doing now is I've been running a private practice in Houston, Texas since 2013. And then just like the last 2 years, I added functional medicine where I can actually see clients online, and I run programs online for patients where I'm basically their health consultant for 4 to 6 months. And then I also am an NAET practitioner. As you were like, what is that? Because a lot of people don't really know. The way I explain it is it's really like a specialized form of acupuncture in which the doctor, so it's NAET, it stands for Nambudrapad's Allergy Elimination Technique. Dr. Nambudrapad is an MD, a chiropractor, and a Chinese medicine doctor. And so she combined all of these different modalities to create an allergy elimination technique, because she herself grew up only she was so sick and debilitatingly ill that she could only eat like 3 different foods. And so it was miserable, and Western medicine, like no one really had an answer for her. And so with all of her knowledge and her degrees, she created her own system where you're basically using homeopathy, which is just the imprint of the substance, and you're introducing that to the patient. And then what you're doing is you're you're using kinesiology, acupuncture, meridian theory, homeopathy, and when you do that treatment when the patient has the substance of the homeopathic, then it creates a new relationship. My dog is going crazy.
Yeah.
He's like super excited about this talk. It creates a new relationship with that substance. So, for instance, so many of us have an egg allergy, for instance. And the reason we have an egg allergy is it's in most vaccines. Okay. So, when you're given a vaccine, for instance, then you don't necessarily have an immune reaction just to the bacteria or virus that you're being immunized for. You have a reaction, you're creating an immunological reaction to all the ingredients in that component. And so, because eggs are used so commonly to, you know, to make the cells and everything, for the virus for them to be grown on, then we create a reaction to that. So I work with food allergies, food sensitivities, etc. And when we use the NAET, it's basically creating a new relationship with that substance and telling the immune system to say, hey, this is not a harmful substance, chill out.
Wow.
So,
That's really fascinating. I'm really curious about given what we'll circle around a bit, I guess, because we'll probably backtrack. But since you were talking about the egg allergies and injections that people receive, I'm curious your views on the current injections and we can call them the V.
yeah.
And how I think there's a lot of people who are kind of sounding the alarm for years previously. Now, granted, I think these current Vs are very different than the previous ones, but I don't think the previous ones were, totally unproblematic. And
Right.
so I'm curious about the progression and what you've seen. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit?
Yeah, so I've always had much more awareness around these, not this one specifically, but just in general, because I work so much with patients who have been injured pharmaceutically, and most of the time it comes from the childhood V's. And so I was cautious when this one came out, and so I did a lot of research. And one of the things that I really, or I was just really focusing on, like, people like Dr. Tenpenny, who have been working in the industry for a long time. Before I think they were even out, or right as they had come out, she had already come up just through her own research, based on these specific ones, both the mRNAs and the adeno, which is the J&J and AZ, that they, at that time, early on, they already had 20 mechanisms of injury and potential death. Since then, she's done like 40 plus mechanisms of injury. And so I was very cautious, and to be honest, I thought it was going to take a lot longer for the adverse events to roll out. But what I'm seeing in my clinic, and hearing from just among my family and friends, is that the damage is much more acute and it's accelerating things more quickly. I think the most concerning thing that just came out was with Dr. Ryan Cole, where he was sounding the alarm on what it's doing to the immune system, and how it's shutting down certain aspects of the immune system that specifically take care of viruses and cancer, because we have an immune system that takes care of that and keeps all of that in check. Otherwise, we would all be fully blown, with all sorts of viruses that we've come in contact with, or cancer cells, etc. And so what he's finding is that, and other doctors around the world as well, is that it's knocking out specific aspects of the immune system, and so cancers are accelerating at a rapid rate, in a much more aggressive rate, and in patient types that normally wouldn't have such severe activity, like for instance, much younger patients. So, and then what I've seen specifically in my practice is I work primarily with women. My specialty is chronic illness, autoimmune, and also hormonal health. So I see a lot of women, and what I'm noticing is hair loss, bruising, like just all full on body bruising, which is concerning because we know about the microclotting. But if it's at the bruising state, it's beyond the microclotting at that time. So if it's doing that there, what is it doing to the vessels, right?
Right.
So it's really just, it's concerning, it's sad. And at this point, I feel like there's so much evidence out there that is showing the truth of the matter, of what's happening. And we have a responsibility to start searching on our own, because we're not getting the truth,
Right.
from the major avenues. I can tell you I haven't had any patients who have passed away. However, I have had patients whose direct family members have, and it's been immediate. So,
When you say immediate, how soon?
like a heart attack or stroke within a matter of days.
Oh, yeah.
Sepsis,
Yeah.
things like that, total organ failure, things like that. And granted, it is in more of the elderly population at this time, but my patient population is much younger, so
Yeah.
it's pretty scary. And then to also see how the people who are standing up and saying, no, I'm not going to get this, now they're not going to have a job in a lot of states. So yeah, I don't like the way that this is going. And even if people believe everything that we've been told so far, there still has to be something in the back of your mind going, something is not right.
Right. When 70,000 medical workers are losing their jobs and they're willing to take that risk to stand up, you have to wonder, what do they know and why are that many of them willing to take that risk? Yeah. So I'm curious. I've seen you're such a courageous warrior from what I've seen, really sounding alarms. And you talk not only about the medical tyranny and the medical potential ramifications that we're incurring currently, but you do talk a little bit about the political milieu and paradigm that we're up against currently. And I'm curious if that is new for you, having been in the medical field for so long, or have you always had an interest in politics? Has your views changed?
Well, I have always kind of had an interest in politics, but I feel like I'm pretty open-minded. So I grew up in Texas, and my family, when I was growing up in the 80s, my grandparents raised me, and so they really did listen to the debates and decide who they were going to vote for. And it was never like just straight Republican ticket or straight Democrat. But as I grew up, like I voted for, Bush, and then I voted for Obama. And then when Bernie came on the scene, I was really energized by him. But seeing everything unfold, because 2020 hindsight is 2020, right? I think even though we knew that there was so much corruption, we didn't know the extent of it, right?
Yeah.
I obviously knew that there was significant corruption within the pharmaceutical industry, um, but I had no idea just how these people who are being brought in front of us as our leaders are really just puppets, and there's something behind them
Yeah.
that's pulling the strings, you know?
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
think we all started to see that in 2019, 2020. And so, yeah, I think it's important for us to realize that this is all a bigger agenda that's been played out. And the goal right now is to wake up, because it's not good. It's not going to be good for us
No,
as
it's not
humans.
humanity. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I keep saying the Great Awakening combats the Great Reset. So the more people who can wake up and more people who start asking questions and begin their path of inquiry, I think that the better the hopes are for combating the Great Reset, and the better the hopes are for preserving the free will of humanity. So, yeah.
Because the trajectory that we're being led down is pretty detrimental for us. And I'm a single mom. I have 2 daughters, and so I feel like I could push my way through, but I don't. What are we going to leave to our kids?
Right.
And so that's really the challenge.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
many aspects. So.
No, absolutely. So I'm curious about, you said that you worked in the pharmaceutical industry and you witnessed a lot of corruption. And I'd love if you could speak to some of the corruption that you witnessed and how that's tied to, has that been further illuminated by these past 18, 19 months? Yeah.
Yeah. So I entered into the pharmaceutical industry in 2001. So at that time, I feel like it was the peak era of just being a pharma rep was fun. It should have been fun. We had like all the goody stuff that we were given to our clinics and our doctors, and we were taking them out to dinner, and they were winning trips and all these crazy things. It started to crack down when I left, which was in 2010. But the first thing I noticed is, first of all, I got hired supposedly for my education and the fact that I would be able to easily convey to doctors mechanism of action, et cetera, with pharmaceuticals because of my science background. Most people that they hire in pharmaceuticals, I don't know how it is now, but then it's usually communications majors, marketing majors.
Interesting. Okay.
So I was one of the only few on a team that had a good science background. So the first company I worked for, it was Eli Lilly, and they were the Prozac company, and so I only stayed with them a year, and the reason is I sold psychotropic meds, and the ones that I sold was the first non-stimulant for ADHD, and then I also sold a mood stabilizer for bipolar and schizophrenia. And when I was selling the mood stabilizer, a lot of doctors were coming back and telling me that their patients could not control their eating, and they kept they would gain like 40 or 60 pounds in a matter of 3 months, which seems like completely impossible.
Yeah.
The biggest difference was an 80-pound change, and it was just shooting them into diabetic 2 and all of this stuff. Well, we were just the mouthpieces of the pharmaceutical industry. And so we would go back and relay that information back to our managers, and then they would come back and be like, well, this is what you need to tell them. Basically, they are just choosing to eat poorly. And instead of grabbing a bag of potato chips, they need to grab fruit or something healthy. But they were they were kind of suppressing the data that was coming back with the diabetes, the blood sugar levels, the weight gain, all of this stuff.
Right.
So eventually they went to court and they lost in court, I think over $400 million, because that drug got in trouble, basically.
Right.
So then I went on thinking that it was just a fluke, and I was just going to go to a different company. It would be different. Right. So then I go to a different company. It's another big pharma company, and I'm in training, and I'm looking at the data because for this one in particular, I'm being trained on a blood pressure medication, and I'm looking at the data and I'm like, this does not make sense. Like they're messing with the numbers, because what was in the prescribing information, which is like the actual data from the trials, was not the same as the information in our sales aid. And so it looked really good in our sales aid and it looked kind of not so great in the sales data, but they were really manipulating with the statistics. And I was in a class of maybe 150 new hires, and me and another guy, we were the only two who had master's degree levels in statistics. So I understood how to get numbers, but they weren't doing it right. They were just messing with it so bad. And I got to the point where I was like, okay, I asked the trainer, I was like, can you please explain to me? She was like, no, it's not your job to understand. It's your job to relay what you're being told to relay. And I was just like, so I remember calling one of my girlfriends who actually worked for the company that I had left. And I was crying in the hallway going, I can't do this. Like they're lying to us again. This company is still lying, da, 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 da. Anyway, I went ahead and I just kept working for the company. And then after about 5 years with them, I went to another company, and this was a biotech company. So this one, I'm going to grab him. Okay, 1 second.
Yeah.
He's like, he's a 5-pound chihuahua. So I went to a biotech company, and this was more for like, you only got jobs with them if you had been in the field for a long time, you have a lot of experience. And they were really looking for science backgrounds, because what we're dealing with is infusions versus pills, etc.
Right.
And so I got hired, and this was the worst of all of them. I got hired to launch a new medication that was coming out for osteoporosis, and it was going to be an infusion for it. And again, they hadn't launched the product yet. We were just being hired so that we could introduce the doctors to the concept of how this drug that should be approved, eventually, how it works, like a different mechanism of action, etc. And as the data was coming out, they were suppressing it, that there was quite a distinct difference in patients who were in the trials that received the injection versus the placebo, that they had a higher rate of bone cancer. And at that point, I was like, well, shoot, my grandmother would be a perfect patient for this medication, but I don't want her taking this. And I was like, so if I don't want her taking this, I don't want any grandma taking this. Like, what's going on here? So I showed my pushback. My lovely manager, he told me that I was not hired to be a scientist or to really look at the data. I was just hired to be a cheerleader. And I looked at him and I go, did you get the impression that I was like the cheerleader type when we interviewed? Because I know at that time, like I looked the part, but I don't act the part. I'm very introverted. I'm very,
You didn't come with your pom-poms?
Yeah. And he was like, you're either a cheerleader or you're gone. And so I was like, I'm gone. I can't do this, because he was literally making my life miserable. So I left the company, and that was after like 10 years. I was like, okay, God has shown me 3 times over the past 10 years, it is
Right.
not in the cards. And the way in which I left this company, it was very harsh. Like, it was devastating the way that they treated me.
Wow.
So there was no looking at for another company. At the time, I was a single mom. It was just me and my daughter. She was only 18 months old.
Wow.
And if you work in the pharmaceutical industry, they supply your phone, your computer, your car, everything.
Yeah.
So I quit the very next morning at 6 a.m. They come, they pick everything up. And I go to my neighbor's house and use their phone and call my dad. And I'm like, hey, I just quit my job. I don't have anything.
Oh.
And and then I was like, oh shoot, what am I gonna do?
Wow. Yeah.
And then this is where fate comes in. So about a year and a half before I quit,
Wow.
I went to a retreat because I'm also an astrologer.
Oh,
I
wow.
took 10 years of formal classes in astrology, and I went to an astrology retreat in Austin, and I met the man who was at the time the president of one of the Austin acupuncture schools. And he was like, oh yeah, you need to go into acupuncture. You need to do Chinese medicine. You would love it. And I literally remember rolling my eyes at him thinking, that is the most ridiculous thing to put needles in somebody and think you're going to heal them. Right. So then fast forward, I quit, and I'm like, oh shoot, what am I going to do? And then that little conversation came in, and there's 3 schools in Texas for Chinese medicine. There's 2 in Austin and 1 in Houston. So I drove to the one in Houston. By this point, my dad had given me his extra car. So I drove to the one in Houston, and that day they are signing up new students for the fall semester.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, I'll try it. And then 3.5 years later, I'm done, and I have my practice, and I guess the rest is history.
Wow. That's amazing. That's really amazing. It was I mean, 2 things that really stick out for me were, one, you felt it was really important to maintain integrity. So you were getting these voices and, these very clear signs that, this was not aligned with who you are or who you want to be or what you want your role in the world to be.
Right.
And that takes a lot of courage. And I think that's, something we need a lot more. And I think the other thing that sticks out for me is that you really took the leap of faith, and it was your faith that was able to sustain you to make this next, huge life change, and with very little, and not only not knowing what your future was going to hold, but you had a dependent, you had your child counting on you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's amazing. So then you decided to start your practice in, doing more of the Chinese medicine, the acupuncture. Before we delve into that, because I'm very curious about that, I'd love to hear a little bit about what you saw. These were very specific drugs, and you saw how corrupt. You were only supposed to be a good doobie. You're not supposed to think. You're not supposed to question.
Right.
Use all of your scientific knowledge that you've worked very hard to achieve, to which you would think would be an asset, right? So you're not supposed to use any of that, which we're seeing a lot of today, by the way.
Yeah.
Seeing, people are not allowed to question the narratives. They're not allowed to, present alternative evidence and data. So all this to say, where do you think the connection from the corruption of Big Pharma to kind of the, corruption that we're just seeing globally? It's not even just in the United States, that we're seeing this. It's I don't know that it was ever just the United States, but now people are really seeing the global effects of all of this. And just to ask one more thing to tag onto this, and you can, answer in whatever order you'd like. But you work now more in a natural holistic arena, and that has been very suppressed. There's actually states that, you know, naturopathic medicine, to get a naturopathic license, is actually illegal.
Right.
You've definitely seen, you know, I've done posts on how, you know, Rockefeller did hired Flexner to do the Flexner report, which really curtailed both schooling for as well as the industry of naturopathic medicine. So yeah, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I do feel and see how suppressed it is. I mean, just coming out of acupuncture school, like we've all been frustrated with, if you Google anything about acupuncture, it basically leads you right down to quackery. So it's really hard to overcome the general narrative of everything that they're just blasting out. But I do feel like, again, it's part of the plan, because I've been now about 10 years in the Western medicine world. Granted, I wasn't a physician, but I was talking with 15 of them a day about their patients. And now I see my own patients and I see the changes. And so it's like, there's not one time in the 10 years that I was in pharma that any of the products that I sold healed their patients. Whereas I witness miracles every week working in clinic, things that are quote unquote uncurable or chronic or lifelong or whatever it may be. And we're able to rewind just by being so much more gentle with the approach as well, and allowing the patient to take responsibility of their own health, and us kind of helping to manage that along the way. I do believe that the pharmaceutical industry, the tech industry, our politics, all of these things, even down to potentially judges and police force, are kind of puppets that are being controlled by a more nefarious aspect. And so it's hard to say, is the corruption really coming from the pharmaceutical industry, or are they just doing what they're told as well? I think it's probably a matter of both, because it's so embedded, and it does seem to have gotten worse. You know, it really seems to, I mean, not just with the 2020 and 2021 stuff. I mean, just putting really harmful things out there and then taking them off the market when so many people have been negatively impacted.
Yes.
So, and it seems, especially now in today's, situation, it's really, we've never, ever seen anything like this, where if you look at the VAERS data, you compare that to all the other data that they've been bringing in over the past, since the 80s or however, or early 90s, since it's been going on. And there's never been, it's exponentially higher.
Yep.
It's like,
they pulled the H1N1 after 24 deaths.
Yes.
24.
After 24. So that's what I'm saying. It's like, there is something going on. It is all, I do believe it's all part of the plan, but it's like they're not being as careful, because they're literally getting away with whatever they want so far.
Yeah.
They're completely getting away with it.
And they are doing, so you were talking about, like, with even before this, how we were seeing, all these adverse reactions to whether it be to pharmaceuticals or whether it be to previous Vs. And they play the whole, like, oops, we didn't know, like they recently did with this V. They were saying how, we didn't know that it didn't stay like in the injection site, but they actually did, because they did studies with the M version in 2017. And they discovered that the studies very clearly illustrate that. So this wasn't an oops, oh, we didn't know. And the same thing with all of the previous Vs. The Vaccine Compensation Act was in 1986. You know, how many decades ago, why was that implemented?
Right.
There were never any complications. So,
Yeah.
And the same goes for, I could go down the list as you could, with all the pharmaceutical, drugs that have been implemented.
So I guess my whole thing is they're like, well, we're getting away with it, so we might as well just keep doing what we want to do and not really hide it and not really be so secretive about it. Because right now, I mean, you've got to be asleep to not see. At least something is off.
Yes.
And yeah. But I mean, hopefully people start to see, hopefully people start to become more aware, and so much awareness comes out. Like I think about the breast implants, like that's a whole movement right now for explant surgery, and things like that. So hopefully people start to wake up and notice that we are being lied to in every aspect.
Every. So you have some education in virology. I'm curious your thoughts on the current virus.
Well, I think, looking back,
yeah,
you can connect the dots of how your life got you to where you are.
Right.
And I think that having that background was the initiator for me waking up so quickly when 2020 happened in March, because I was just like, coronavirus? That's weird. That's like the family of cold viruses. I was familiar with SARS and MERS, but just something just didn't seem right. And they were just really pumping it up. And I was like, well, there's stuff you can do for that.
Right.
That should be helpful. And yet it was just fear, fear, fear. And so I think it literally took me maybe 3 days to be like, okay, this is BS. Like we're being lied to. And then the curtain falls everywhere else. You're like, oh, what else have we been lied to so drastically about? If for this, and then once you can see the lies now, you can see the trajectory that we're headed. And it's like, okay, we're just barreling down this train track, and it's like we've got to stop it. But people just keep hopping on the train, and they're like,
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope that we've created a tipping point somehow, but it's still frustrating because even people in my closest circle don't seem to see, right?
No, that's incredibly frustrating. When you say that it pretty much took you 3 days to realize we're being lied to, and then you went down the rabbit hole to see what else we're being lied to about, and everything. What could you speak to some of the specific lies regarding the virus? Initially, we certainly could go down, the lies about the V, but what about the virus?
So I think what we were finding was so we were being pumped so much with the number of cases, right? In the beginning, do y'all remember those little tick marks?
Yep.
With the cases, and the PCR tests, they're inaccurate, right? They were never meant to be used as a diagnostic tool. So that was just a huge propagation of fear. So I feel like in some ways that there was this respiratory virus that was happening, but because of the way, I think it was more, not necessarily about the virus itself, it was more about the way in which we were being coached or told to handle it. And so that was kind of like completely opposite of anything you would normally do, let's just say in a regular cold and flu season. We would never like shut ourselves in just because it's cold and flu season. We would do our best to like eat the most nutritious foods and try to get outside and get sunshine and, try to relax and not be as stressed out. And yet everything was just fear, panic. I mean, just the mask in and of itself, it's like there's no way that that's going to stop a viral particle. It's just not, it's impossible. So I started seeing it was really the approach to it versus the virus itself.
Right.
You know? And then when I started realizing that I was like an outlier or an outsider because I was seeing these things. Like one of the things that I raised was some awareness around the mask. So my sister, she is a year younger than me. She was born at 22 weeks gestation in 1979. And at that time, she was the youngest baby to ever live. And as a result, she's deaf. And so because we're basically the same age, we grew up together.
Yeah.
And so sign language was always my second language. And for people who know me, they know that I'm very expressive in the way that I speak, and I'm always talking with my hands. And it's because I grew up in a family with sign language. And so when the masks came out, I was like, well, what about the deaf people? Because they rely on, lip reading.
Yes. I
So
learned how to speak by lip reading. I'm hearing impaired significantly. I didn't get any, so I was almost 6. And that's how I learned how to speak. So yeah, thank you for speaking to them.
And then I realized that I rely on lip reading. Because I grew up watching her, that's just how we grew up. And so when I'm at a restaurant and they have the mask on, all I hear is wah, 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 wah. And I'm like, looking at whoever I'm with, I'm like, I have no idea. You're going to have to translate for me because that is not coming through. I need the audible with the visual to determine what. And so I wrote a post at this time when the masks were coming out, trying to bring awareness around the deaf community, also trying to bring awareness around people who have been sexually abused or sexually assaulted, because so many of them have had this, like they've had
the trauma response,
put their hand over their mouth. And so I was like, what's going on like with this liberal crowd? Because granted, I had just voted for Bernie however many years ago. I was hoping, whatever, that's a whole nother story. But I was just like, aren't they like the bleeding hearts? Like, shouldn't they be like taking up for these victims and saying, okay, masking people who've been sexually assaulted, masking deaf people, this is completely wrong. But when I put that post out, it created an uproar. And I would say like 90% of my colleagues just completely blasted me and I got ostracized. I had patients reaching out to me, calling me an anti-masker. I am a sexual assault victim, and I didn't know why, but every time I would put my mask on, I was checking my oximeter, to see like what my oxygen rates were doing. And every time I would put my mask on, it was going down below 90. And I was like, that's so weird. And I showed it on video. I was like, okay, here's me without the mask. I'm at like 99, 100. And then I put the mask on and then it just goes, zoop. So I was like, what is that? And it made me realize, oh, it's probably like a physical reaction to the trauma being replayed, you know? So anyway, I was just like trying to bring awareness around that, but people were on the bandwagon and not seeing anything outside of what we're being told, as far as the narrative. So it really wasn't about the virus itself, except that we weren't dealing with something obvious like Ebola or, something really terrifying.
Right.
And it was about how the approach was. It just didn't make sense. And if you could step outside of that fear just for a moment and kind of look at it objectively, then there was nothing to fear. There really wasn't.
Right. Right.
So
Absolutely. Yeah, I can so relate because I'm hearing impaired because I, read lips, and I had this feeling of just that it's so dark. I seeing other people with the mask and feeling like disconnected from them, and just, I mean, and I think even people who haven't had that kind of a trauma experience, when you see masks, you think like criminals, robbers, you think,
sick,
yeah,
really sick people. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Just, it was so dark, and you're not seeing the full, so as somebody who is hearing impaired, I'm that much more dependent on it. But I think all human beings need, and especially children, like that's such an integral part of their development, their social development, their psychological development, their interpersonal skills. And to strip them of that is just so incredibly inhumane to me.
It is.
So you talked about some of your colleagues and how you were being lambasted by them, and you have two children. So what are your thoughts on both all these mandates with being insisted to wear masks when some people, I mean, you're having a physiological response to it, where you're deprived of oxygen. But isn't that the prop they claim, with COVID, if you go below 90, like you need to be hospitalized. But meanwhile, just putting on a mask did that for you. So where's
Right.
the concern for that? So what is your thoughts on, yeah, what's going to happen, how we can fight that?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think we all have our own little battle to embark on when it comes to what are we going to do, because I'm grateful that I'm in Texas. I'm in the suburbs of a big city, and I have the ability to put my youngest daughter in a private school where they encourage the little ones not to wear a mask. And, her homeroom teacher is pregnant and she's never worn a mask. And it's like, it's so great to see that. And then my oldest daughter, she's in 8th grade, and I took them out last year for a year because of all the craziness, and everyone was required to wear a mask. So we did homeschooling. It worked okay for my oldest daughter. For my youngest daughter, she's having to repeat the grade, which is fine. But for my oldest daughter, she was like, no, I want to go back to public school, but it's an option for them. Like, they don't have to wear it. And she says only about 20% of the classmates wear it.
Wow.
So I'm just really grateful for where I am now. And I'm grateful too that I have my private clinic, and I allow my patients to do whatever they feel most comfortable with. And my associate, we are completely on the same page. And I think we've just been each other's rock. And I feel like I've been so lucky because even though I got really blasted at the beginning, I started looking and seeing who in my profession was speaking out, or at least not following the narrative. And so what I did as a Libra moon, always making these connections, I reached out to all of these people individually. And now there's a group of about 10 of us across the nation who we're all on the same page, and we're on you know, a group text together, and we're always reaching out to each other. We went to Sedona last year, or actually in April. So we just have this sisterhood of like-mindedness. And what I love about that is, like, when I'm feeling really funky because I feel like I'm the angry one of the group, not everybody else is feeling that way, and so we're able to like lift each other up, because inevitably, like, we're not always low at the same time, we're not always high at the same time. So we just have a really good, trustworthy group of girls. um so yeah, I feel like I'm just trying to create my own little habitat as functional as possible. I'll tell you this. Um I was completely by myself this weekend. I did not have my kids. And I normally go to Austin because my boyfriend lives there. And he was going to visit his parents. So I had the whole weekend to myself. And I was like, what am I going to do? And there's this like dance hall that opened up in my town. And I went, I was like, oh, that seems fun. But what am I mean, so I literally went Saturday night. There was the whole dance hall was full.
Wow.
No masks. I mean, I took video because the entire dance floor was just so crowded. They were all line dancing, and I got tears in my eyes because it felt normal.
Yes.
And I have a girlfriend who lives in California that like she can't even go out to eat,
Nope.
So it's like I was just so grateful for being where I am, because even if I were in the city, I don't think I would have that. But because I'm out a little bit further, it's a bit different, which I'm grateful for.
Yeah, absolutely. I having just moved out of California, I can really speak to that. It was so amazing. I've been here for, I guess, exactly 2 weeks now. And
Mhm.
it was just this feeling of, one of my business partners said to me, he's like, and he's so sweet, like he tried to be so polite about it. He's like, I don't want to be rude, but I don't think you're like an angry, bitter person, but you were sort of starting to sound it like a lot.
Yeah.
And I can hear a difference in your voice. Like you just sound so different. And, I mean, I obviously on some level knew because I wouldn't have moved across the country if I didn't, but I didn't realize just how oppressed I felt. All the social justice warriors, like, out there claiming oppression, but really these people who are stripped of their very basic freedoms really are being oppressed. They're not able to choose. They're being denied access to free air, that is your most basic human need. It's not even, that's not a privilege. That's what you need to survive. And it's funny because years ago I used to joke about how like they were gonna regulate air. And it used to be like one of those, like so absurd, like they're gonna start regulating, but they have with the math. And so I feel like
Are you in Missouri, or where
I'm
are you?
sorry.
Where are you right now?
So I'm in Franklin, Tennessee. It's a suburb
Oh,
of I'm in Tennessee. So and it is so different. Just it's different in a lot of ways, obviously, but I'm not in the heart of a city. So that's huge. I've lived in a city my whole entire adult life, and I lived right outside the city growing up. I grew up right outside New York City. So my parents' house was 2 miles from George Washington Bridge. So I was always really just in that very fast-paced kind of lifestyle. So this has been, a huge transition in that regard, which I'm so grateful for. I think I really needed it, but just to be free to walk out and see faces, and not to have signs telling me that, in order to do things, I need to inject something that, I may not survive.
right.
So yeah, it's been very freeing. So my concern is there's all these mandates being passed. We're seeing what's happening in Australia, in Canada, in New Zealand, and all around the world, and in some of these cities like New York and Los Angeles, San Francisco, and people say, oh, well, what's happening there will never happen here. But, that's how incrementalism works. And they're masters of it, as the powers that be. They're masters of incrementalism. I mean, we all remember 2 weeks to flatten the curve, right? Here we are. So what do you think? Do you think there's hopes of stopping this? Do you think that enough people are going to wake up? And what are things that people who are fighting for freedom and, free will can do?
I think for those who are fighting, I keep encouraging people, regardless of how much your following is, or how much influence you feel like you may or may not have, it doesn't matter, because if you see what's happening, I feel like it's our duty to speak truth to it.
Yeah.
And I say that because as I say something, it might kind of open the eyes of somebody else, and it's a ripple effect. So every single person who sees that, and they I feel like we have the responsibility and the duty to start speaking it. I'm the type of person where I can't not say anything. That's why I'm like, okay, I'm going to put this down for a little bit, but then I'm like, no, I have to say something. So I think that as far as the trajectory, I feel like there's two possibilities. There's the possibility of we're going to keep going down this, and I envision, they take out the West Coast, they take out the East Coast, and then they start coming in, and states like Texas and Florida would be, quote unquote, the last to fall. Because you see how easily Australia has gone down, and potentially Canada too. I'm not so sure about Europe. It looks like a few little pockets in Europe are doing pretty well. I really think they're after the United States, and I think that we've already been infiltrated from within through this past election.
Yep.
That he did not win. I mean, come on. So, but I think it was part of the plan. It was like an internal.
That's been in the works for a very long time.
Absolutely.
This is kind of a culmination or an inflection point. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the scarier projection, and then there's the projection of there has to be a revolution. And I think that that's a likely outcome, because if you know astrology, in 1776, when the United States became the United States, we are coming up on that point in February of 2022, where we have our Pluto return, which is a 276-year transit. And so what that means is the energy of that 1776 revolution is going to be sparked again.
Wow. I really chill.
I feel that building up. I think October is going to be a big month. I think going into the holidays could be potentially frustrating, because we don't have certain things that we would normally have during the holidays. And I think that it's going to create a point where people have had enough. And I think what the people who are controlling the situation are hoping for a civil war. I don't think it's going to be that. I think it's going to be a revolution. And that's what I'm hoping.
When you say revolution, what do you mean? Because I personally, I would prefer to, I keep saying I want a declaration of restoration.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I like, the idea of restoring the founding principles. And revolution is definitely something different. So I'm curious, you said you would like to see it. Do you want a true revolution, or what does it mean to you?
I think if things get bad enough, that's what's going to need to happen. But I think a revolution could also, it can be perceived in so many different ways. It could be just simply the rising up of the people, and the people taking back the control, because ultimately in the United States, we are so unique in that we have the control, and yet the government is stomping all over that. And it's like, when are we going to say, no, everything that you're doing is illegal?
Yeah.
I mean, not only is it illegal based on our Constitution, but the Nuremberg codes, and so many other aspects. And now the fact that so many people are losing their jobs for this. I mean, if you think about all the presidents in the past, they were graded on how employment was. and if employment dipped a little bit, they got a really negative rating. And it's like, this president is forcing people out of their jobs.
No.
I mean, so blatantly. So I certainly hope that the people rise up and they claim sovereignty and ownership over our country once again.
Yeah. We the people, of the people, for the people, of the people, by the
So
people,
I
for the
don't
people.
know what that looks like. I just hope it's that people just say, enough is enough. And, I'm not somebody that goes out and I don't do any of the marches or anything. I feel like the way in which I can impact people is more through my words, and just speaking and showing truth,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great way. We all have our
so we all have our own little gift.
Exactly.
And so
and it's incumbent upon us to use them and share them.
Yeah.
That's my belief. So
Yeah.
absolutely. I love that. I'm curious about your children, how they're responding to all of this, and have you had conversations with them? What is that like?
My oldest one, I'm very upfront with her. I told her if anything starts to look like how it's looking in other states, she is either doing homeschool or going to my daughter's private school. And I said, but I know I would rather you go to the private school because it's a college prep and it's going to prepare you for your future, versus homeschool. I don't know how much she really got out of that, just because I didn't really have a lot of time, and she's so independent that she was kind of doing it all on her own. So I am very upfront with her, and her dad and stepmom are completely on the same page as me. My youngest daughter, I don't talk to her just because she's so young, and she doesn't really get it. Also, me and her dad are not on the same page with most things. He's very, it's strange, because I don't mean to put it down, but it seems like this progressive movement, the liberal ideology, has become quote unquote woke. And what drew me to my youngest daughter's dad in the first place was he was completely a black sheep, and he would always go against the grain. And now he's like the most Trump hating, angry, woke person. And I'm like, what happened to you? So we are very much not on the same page. And I'm just glad that we have her in a really good school, and things look safe for right now.
Yeah. Wow, that must be so hard, because it's not just someone you were intimately involved with, and but it's also your daughter's future is at stake. So I'm curious what your thoughts on dealing, because it's not something you can just write off, or how do you navigate that? And what are your do you have any words of wisdom for people who are dealing with loved ones who are very diametrically opposed to their positions?
So I feel like in our situation, we are on the same page as far as masking and the V. So at least we can be okay with that. And I don't think that there's anything else that can potentially harm as much as that. And so I just really just keep my mouth shut and don't poke the bear when it comes to anything with him, just because he can become so volatile. He's also the type of person that if I say one thing, he wants to purposely do the opposite. So I just kind of lay low. But as far as friends and family members, I'm seeing a lot of this with my patients is they're giving in because their husband wants it, or their mother-in-law. I don't know how many mother-in-law stories I've heard. It's ridiculous. But all I can say is, and I've done this with my own family, is they have no they, they have no right to tell me what I need to do, how I need to raise my children, or what I'm going to potentially inject into my body or that of my family members. Um, and their opinions are not welcome. Um, I can be a little harsh, and so they don't they don't cross that boundary. I think it's just that I have really strong boundaries with my family members. But thankfully, for the most part, they've all been on the same page. And so, again, I feel like I'm grateful because of my tiny circle.
Yeah.
I've been good. I would just say if you honestly knew the potential and harm that this can cause you or your loved ones, you you would never give in to someone else's obliging.
Right.
You know, you would never do it. And I think that's where the education comes from, which is frustrating because a lot of people don't want to look at it. They want to literally live in la la land and be like, oh, I don't want to know about that. I don't want to know.
Yeah.
But if you do know, and if you are willing to look at the truth of things, you would never, ever, ever give in. I don't think. I think that's what I'm saying. Like, if people had true informed consent, they would be willing to lose family members as far as like the relationship with them, or they would be willing to lose their job, etc. So I think it just shows that these 70,000 people, they do have informed consent, and this is the hill that they're standing on.
Absolutely. I'm curious your thoughts. There have been some projections that, in the upcoming years, we may see a lot of people who have taken to not survive. I'm curious your thoughts on that. And if you do think that's accurate, what do you think that's going to be like for the survivors? That's kind of a horrific atrocity to witness.
Yeah, I know. I talked to my boyfriend about this because it's hard for me to like wrap my head around, because at the time it wasn't when I had this discussion with him, it wasn't approved yet for kids. And I was just like, there's going to be so many orphans. What are we going to do with all the children? And to the point where I was actually having dreams of, I think I adopted 3 children. There was like 2 toddlers and 1 infant that I adopted. And because I just kept thinking like, how is this going to, like, just think of all the homes that are going to be just all how is it going to unfold, but now that it's for the kids too, I'm like, oh, so now they're just going to take out potentially whole families. So I don't know. I think the frustrating part with so many doctors, and I was watching a video today, I put it on my Telegram channel, was this doctor showed blood work from one of his patients before, and then after the first, and then after the second. And he was just like, we don't have answers because we don't know why this is happening, how this is happening, what's in it to cause this. And when he was looking at the blood work, there's no medication for this, because basically it was just showing it's wiping out the immune system. And it was actually presenting as autoimmune and somewhat like HIV. And so he was like, we don't have
What did you say? HSD?
HIV.
Oh,
Is
HIV.
presenting. Yeah, because it's blowing out the immune system. So yeah, I don't know what the repercussions are going to be, but I'm just trying to, like, in that aspect, live one day at a time and try to learn as much, because I know that that's also my gift, is I can understand the science and the biology and anatomy and physiology and see if there's anything that can help these patients or prevent issues in the future,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So you were saying that, that it was showing the difference in the blood work after the first shot and then after the second one. What are your thoughts on, I hear a lot of people say that, the the one shot wonder, which they're now talking about boosting for. So it's not such a one shot wonder. Saying how like that's so much safer, and we know it's not a typical V. It doesn't have the V virus. It's an adenovirus, and it's a viral vector. It's a different mechanism. But what are your thoughts on the differences? And is there any truth to it being
safer?
Yeah.
So based on the work that Dr. Tenpenny has looked at, she feels like it's actually potentially worse than the mRNAs. And then if you look at the recent Project Veritas with the whistleblowers from J&J, they were like, we're not taking it. Like they actually got Moderna. So what does that tell you?
So they still took one? They went and took the Moderna?
Yeah, one guy did. He was like, no, I went and got Moderna.
The DARPA project that they did all the research on in 2017. And we saw the adverse reactions in 2017. That's interesting.
Yeah. So there's not one that's safer. It's just a different mechanism that is being used.
Right. So in what ways do they say that, just for people who may not be, I've seen Dr. Tenpenny. I think she's wonderful and really brave. But what are some of the things they're saying that might be a worse consequence from the J&J?
Well, they have a higher risk of the clotting, actually. I mean, they all do, but she was just talking about, because it uses an adenovirus versus like the mRNA. And she said that in and of itself is linked to a lot of different cancers, from my understanding. So I haven't reviewed it recently, but I just remember her saying that if you think that the one shot is going to be better than the others, you're sorely mistaken. Right. And potentially even worse. So.
Wow. Yeah, not good. What are some things that, since you work in a more holistic environment, what are some things, and one of the things I love about that, I'm not anti-allopathic medicine. I think there's definitely a need and a time and a place for it. Yeah. I think that's just a hybrid of both, and how blessed are we that we can have both, at this day and age. But I think one of the great things about a more holistic natural approach is that it encourages people to take ownership of their health. And right now, I think people need to have more autonomy in general. So what are some things you recommend people doing in this current time that, can help them, build their immunities against the virus, that can, build, then the other thing I want to ask you is about the effects of, we'll call it the potential shedding. Are you curious on that? And yeah.
So as far as what they can do, just the basic things, like anything that you would do for normal cold and flu season, making sure that your vitamin D levels are up, making sure that you're eating really good, healthy, nutritious food. From a Chinese medicine perspective, if you're eating too many salads or smoothies, that can actually be a little bit more detrimental to your health. And so now that we're in the fall season, cooking food, doing lots of crock pots and things like that. And then I tend to simplify things when I'm working with my patients. And so there's a Chinese medicine formula that we use that helps prevent like cold and flu. And they actually did a study in China when they were working in the COVID facilities in the hospitals there. There was a group of physicians, I think there was over 400 of them, who took this specific formula. And it's like a very generic allergy formula that we use here in the States. They took it, and then there was a group of physicians who didn't take it. And of those who did take that formula on a daily basis, 0 of them got COVID. Whereas the other physicians, there was about a 20 to 40%, I don't remember the details, but they did end up getting COVID. So instead of like loading ourselves up with all of these vitamins, I mean, there's plenty of them out there, the vitamin C, the vitamin D, glutathione, NAC, What else? I mean, quercetin, zinc, all of these things are protective for antiviral. Or you can potentially work with a Chinese medicine practitioner who's also an herbalist and, get a formula, which is what I suggest for my patients, just because it's easier to take a formula than it is to take like 10 different supplements a day. But also just the social impact. And so in the beginning, I just felt so distraught because I had lost so many of my good friends. Um, this was really just a dividing point. If you were not on the same page with whoever it is that you were closest with, I think a lot of it, those relationships just broke down. And so being proactive in finding your group is so important. Just having that safe space to go when you're feeling alone or down or feeling a little pessimistic about the future or whatever it may be. I think that's just as important as what supplements that we're putting into our system. You know, taking advantage of the fall weather and moving and just, staying active and like doing crazy things like going to a dance hall just to like see how people are normal right now in some areas. I just don't like to overload people with supplements, but if it makes them feel better, then there's definitely the ones that they can take, like, the list of ones. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. I like that you simplify things. I think as a trainer and a coach and like working with people, if they always want to focus on that, like, the thing that might make the difference for the elite athlete, it's like most people just don't, it's like master the basics, and that can make a huge difference. And most people don't master the basics. So why are we working on something that may or may not have a 1% difference,
Yeah.
And it's so confusing and complicated, and so.
I also, just for my own like sanity, I have a box of supplies like in case of an emergency. So that can be prescription meds that you're taking right now that are necessary, kind of load up on those. Any sort of other medications that are prescribed that can be helpful against potentially this virus or any others to come, which they've talked about and it's banned to discuss. Getting stocked up on that. Potentially even getting stocked up on things like antibiotics, that don't need to be refrigerated in case anything happens. Because of the way that the health system is right now, we are not guaranteed good care if anything really terrible happens to us. And so I think it's about really creating a safety net within your own home and having as much stuff as you need. Even like, I think I got like laceration band-aids so that if there's a deep cut, you don't have to get stitches type thing. Just things to just keep on hand in case anything, gets harder down the road.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. We're already starting to see supply chain shortages and interruptions. And so I think in general, that's definitely for healthcare needs. The other thing we're seeing is some of the supplements, like some of the ones you've mentioned, like are being banned. I personally bought a 2-year supply. I'd like to get like a 5-year, but what are your thoughts on that? About what's going on with that? And
I think it's a couple things. I think that it's just another way that they're going to oppress more of the natural health. But I also think anything, if they're like going after one specific thing, then we need to take notice and be like, what does that potentially treat? Or how could that be of assistance to us in this time? Because obviously they don't want us to have it.
Right. What do you think do you have any thoughts on that particular one? Because that was a big, and most people hadn't even heard of it, I remember telling people like stock up and they were like, what's that?
It just helps detox. And so you can also do glutathione, which is using a similar pathway for detox. and just keeping your liver healthy. I mean, Dr. Carrie Madej, she recently discussed the importance of not necessarily putting more stuff in, but just cleaning up your detox pathways, because we're going to be continuing to be bombarded by the poison in our food, in our air, in our water supply, in the soil. And regardless of the transferring from the V and all of that, it's like we have to have our health at optimum, and that means we need to cut out certain foods, and we need to be conscientious of what we're putting into our system and really optimizing our detox pathways instead of like overloading us with supplements. Because what I learn is when patients come in, a lot of times I'm kind of their last resort, and they've been to several MDs and even functional medicine practitioners. And I mean, it's not uncommon for someone to walk in and they're on a vitamin supplement protocol that's 40 capsules a day. And it's like, okay, well, a lot of times when I'm testing them, because with NAET, I'm doing muscle testing, they're not even absorbing the vitamins. And their liver or their kidney detox pathways are pretty gummed up. So it's like, it's just piling stuff on top of stuff, but gumming up the systems even more. And so the goal is to, I just take off as much as possible. I'm like, what can we unload? Because when I'm dealing with chronic illness and autoimmune disease and hormonal health, it's really that we're being bombarded by so many environmental toxins and just toxins in general that are, here's our threshold, and it's like the toxins just hit, and then all of a sudden we're at autoimmune flare or whatever it may be. And so my goal is just to take out those toxins one by one and optimize the detox pathways so that we are able to flush everything out. And if we can do that, then the supplements that we do take or the food that we do ingest is going to be that much more nourishing,
Absolutely. Wow, I was so busy processing, like I forgot all the questions that I had. But I think that's a really, really valid point, because I think, I know where I was going with this. So you do some work with allergies, and I'm curious if you were saying how, because we're going to continue to be poisoned, for lack of a better word to describe it, with so many toxins in our soil, our food, the air, our products. So do you think a lot of the allergies responses, because there's been a huge rise. I mean, prior to a few decades ago, this my sister is anaphylactic to peanuts, and that was not a thing. And now it's like everybody is, So, and we were discussing before about salicylates, and I have a very dear friend, one of my best friends, who is salicylate intolerant and has had anaphylactic, very extreme, fatal reactions to it.
Yeah.
And that was like, I had never heard of it. Now I'm hearing, it's not so, it's a lot more common than you would like it to be. So do you think there is a correlation?
Oh, 1,000%. We already know, when I was doing research on breast implant illness, there's this, it's called Asia. It's a type of medical condition. It's basically an autoimmune syndrome that's caused by the induction of an adjuvant, and an adjuvant is something like a vaccine or a pharmaceutical or something like that. And breast implants, anything that's outside coming in, right? And so it can cause autoimmune syndrome. We know that there's so many things that can lead to food sensitivities. It can be emotional stress over time, overuse of antibiotics, birth control pills, a lot of antidepressants. All of these things can start to break down the gut barrier, the gut lining, because our gut lining is only one cell thick. And so we have these two cells that come together, and what keeps them together are tight junctions. And if we are eating a lot of processed foods, if we're under a lot of stress, gluten in particular, pharmaceuticals, antibiotics, what it does is it goes in and it starts to weaken these tight junctions. And as these tight junctions weaken, it creates gaps between the cells in our gut lining. And then what we come in contact with on a regular basis, instead of it going in and out, it's going in, but then it's going out through the gut lining and into the bloodstream.
They call it leaky gut, right?
Yeah, leaky gut permeability. And then the immune system is like, oh, well, here's a foreign invader. And it's like, it tags it. And so all of these things that are super common become tagged. And they could be injected into our body, whether through an injection, or it could be something like the breast implants and silicone, or it could be our food, all of these things. But regardless, our immune system is creating this relationship with that substance, and it's causing an inflammatory response. And so when I use NAET, I use it with about 90% of my patients, because in autoimmune, we're dealing with chronic inflammation. And so all of these things that we come in contact with on a daily basis, with each treatment, I'm introducing them to a new substance so that they no longer have that inflammatory response to that agent. And we can do it through food, we can do environmental, whether it's pollen or dogs or cats or, anything like that. And, the way that NAET works, the reason I love it so much is it works on 3 levels. It works on the physical, the cellular, and the emotional. And a lot of us have what we would call an emotional allergy. So for instance, I see this a lot with people who have disordered eating. They'll come in and we get to the sugar substance and they just cannot clear it. And I'm like, okay, well, what's the story around sugar? How do you feel when you turn to sugar? Well, I'm angry, or I'm upset, or I'm lonely. And so what I do is I have like a catalog of about 200 different vials that all are emotions. So it could be like betrayal, heartbreak, trauma, shock, any of those. And I couple that with the physical substance that I'm trying to clear. And a lot of times it's like 8 different emotions that I'm trying to clear that's associated with that one food group. And then once we clear the emotional component, then the sugar cravings go away, or the sugar addiction starts to shift. And then I just let my patients know, okay, if you notice that you start to turn back to the sugar craving, stop and note how you're feeling in that moment so that we can address it. Another example is, for instance, one of my patients, she was telling me she had her very favorite leather jacket on, and it was brand new and she was loving it. And she got a phone call that her father had passed away unexpectedly, and she just kind of went into shock. Well, our body doesn't know the difference between, was it what you were eating at the time that put you in shock? Was it what you had on your skin? What was it that put you into shock? So it creates like this heightened reaction to all the things in your immediate surroundings, and it causes like a disharmony with those things. And so she has now, or she did have, an allergy to leather, because at that time she had that heightened emotion and she was wearing leather. So
so it's like a trauma response almost.
It's a trauma response. So a lot, I do not work just with the physical. I have to work with the emotional in order to get, true healing.
Yeah, that's body, soul, spirit, all of it. Yeah.
And that's where like supplements just aren't going to do that,
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think they, and I'm not, the expert here, but I do think they're a good starting ground for a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think they're also a good gateway for people to even be open to exploring, an alternative path that might work. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm more about like cleaning up your immediate environment, taking things out of your environment that are potentially harmful.
Yeah.
Cleaning products, makeup, all of that. cleaning up the diet, drinking filtered water, not out of the fridge, but like actual Berkey water or something like that, you know?
Right, right. Yeah, for sure. You did say that, you were talking about like with all of the toxins we're going to be around, and we talked about the potential
Yeah.
secondary. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's going to be, I personally have had, I wrote about it, experience of, I have not received the V, and I had a, pretty distinct response to being surrounded by a lot of people who were, and it really, really impacted a lot of things, but primarily my hormones.
Yeah.
And now I'm prone to that. I tend to have so for people who are not familiar, like I have PCOS, I'm not typically, I have other hormonal, I'm more sensitive, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But this was a major disruption. So that I had never experienced before.
So I think it's one of those things where we just don't know.
Yeah.
We don't have enough information yet.
Yeah.
My theory is that if the herbal formula that I'm using can help prevent cold and flu viruses or, any of that transmission, that it could potentially inhibit the transmission of the shedding. But we just don't know, because we're all learning this, and we're like, okay, well, we know that it's happening, but why and how do we prevent it?
Right.
So for me, I'm just going to do take the medications that are not allowed to be discussed. That's I think a very viable option to start doing for prevention. In my clinic, we do not allow anybody who's recently had it. We allow for 3 weeks, and the reason is because about 30% of our patients are fertility patients. We're seeing pregnant moms come in every day, and they're just too fragile to even, risk that. So we're doing everything we can to not only protect us as practitioners, but our fellow patients. So we just tell our patients that if they have decided to do it, that we will see them in 3 weeks. I'm going to be traveling on a plane, which I'm not looking forward to. But again, I'm just going to see what happens and hope that the herbs and the supplements that I'm taking help,
For sure.
with the transmission, because we had some issues, as practitioners when it first came out. And then my oldest daughter, she went on a family reunion on her dad's side, and she was getting bloody noses. So.
And how old is she?
She's 13.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard of that, but that's especially at that age. Yeah.
So, I mean, unfortunately, it's not something that we can control.
Right, yeah.
We have to do whatever it is that we have in our disposal and hope it works. And I keep telling myself, I'm like, well, even if there is some sort of transmission happening, at least I'm not choosing to move forward with the injection,
Yeah, no. Control what you can control. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a believer in that. Yeah. These days there seems to be less and less that we have control over. So yeah, pick the things you can. So, well, this has been awesome. Do you have anything else you would like to leave us with, discuss? And yeah, definitely tell us where to find you, all of that good stuff.
No, I was so grateful that you invited me here. Y'all can find me. I'm not on Facebook anymore, so just Instagram at Phoenix Rising Medicine. That's my business one. And then my website is phoenixrisingacu.com. And I do work with clients online and in person in Houston. But if people want to find practitioners who are maybe like-minded, and they don't live in my area and they want to be like face-to-face with a practitioner, like in person, and don't want to do online, they can just reach out to me on Instagram and see if I know of anyone in their area, because I feel like I have a pretty good perspective of, some all across the US of kind of people that are more in alignment with how we're thinking.
That is awesome. And I am so glad you put that out there, because I think in this time, people really do need to find their tribe. And they need to feel like they, especially when they're dealing with their health, that they can communicate with people they trust, and they don't have to, the censorship is enough, but the auto critique, I think, is actually even worse. So, and that's what happens. A lot of people resort to that because out of fear. So,
Yeah.
And we've seen, in the, previous century where that led was not so good. So,
Right. Yeah.
So, absolutely. Well, thank you. And I look forward to, we should do this again sometime. And yeah, everybody definitely go find her.